Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Baumer's conversation. My name is Jesus Lara. I'm a professor on city and regional planning at the Knowlton School. This time, I have invited one of our graduate students to co-host tonight's Baumer presentation.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Edwin Juarez, and like Dr. Lara mentioned, I'm a first-year graduate student in the MCRP program here at the Knowlton School of Architecture.
Well, it's our pleasure to introduce a speaker tonight, Maki Kawaguchi. Maki is an international design leader, passionate about transforming places and building thriving communities. She has extensive experience in urban transformation and places strategy, working in North and South America, Europe, and Asia, and brings an interdisciplinary approach to the built environment with backgrounds in urban design, architecture, and innovation and consultancy. As an urbanist dedicated to unlocking the potential of community in place to improve people's everyday life, she approaches her work with a strong focus on discovering people's needs and desires through inclusive engagements.
Maki also has previously held positions as director of Gehl, a Danish urban design consultancy, at Fundacion Metropoli, a European urban innovation think tank, and as a civic innovation strategist at Humanific and Innovation Consultancy. She has an architecture degree from the University of Southern California and a master's of architecture in urban design from Harvard's Graduate School of Design. She is a frequent guest speaker and has presented in conferences such as Unhabitat for a Better Future, Chicago Council Pritzker Forum, in global cities, and Halifax Art of City Building. And before I turn it over to Maki, I just want to remind everyone in the audience that's joining us live tonight that you can send your questions via the chat box available to you.
Well, now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maki. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight. Thank you, Maki.
Thank you, Jesus, and thank you, Edwin. It's a pleasure to be here. And, since I can't see the audience today, I thought I would start by actually asking all of you to type in the chat if you can, and just write, in there, whether you're a student, or you're academic, or you're professional. I really love to engage with my audience, and I don't see faces today, so it's a little sad. So if you can write in the chat, just who you are, that would be really helpful for me to know who's here today. All right, well, I'm seeing a student. Thanks for joining. And undergrad student, yes. Thank you all for joining. Faculty member, hi there. So good to have you all. Well, I wanted to perhaps present share my screen. So I am going to, share screen and let me know if you can all see this. Let's see, in one moment. Are you all seeing my screen? Oops, sorry. I can't see the chat function. Let's see, 1 second. Okay, I am in full screen mode, but I'm not sure you're seeing that. Well, we can get started. Well, okay, so I wanted to start with a quick exercise, and I'm going to ask you again to type in the chat what feeling and emotions these images evoke for you. And Jesus or Edwin, I'm not able to see the chat for some reason right now.
Okay.
So if you could just read out what you're seeing, that would be super helpful.
Sure, I will do that. And Edwin, you can help on that as well.
And it can be just one word, just the feelings that immediately come to you when you see this image?
We're still in the introduction page, Maki.
Okay, let's see, I think we're having a little bit of a tech issue here. I'm on my next page, but looks like you can't see it. Are we back? Okay, sorry about that glitch. Let's get back to this quick exercise. So again, if everybody could chat, write on the chat function, just a word that describes the feeling and emotion of this image. What are we seeing, Jesus and Edwin?
Well, I guess the audience are not able to see anything. Is that correct, Zach? We're gonna go to the next one, maybe, perhaps. Okay, public space, calm. Okay, relax. Togetherness, relaxing, warm.
Great. All right, I'm going to pull up another image and I'm going to ask the same thing. If everybody could just write one word about
Leisure.
what this image makes you feel like. What are we seeing?
Dangerous.
Dangerous.
Optional activities, annoying.
Okay, so maybe I'll stop there, but basically this exercise is just to make the point that places have an impact on how we feel as humans. And we know that experiences create emotions and feelings. And feelings en masse, contributes to the sense of a place, right? And whether it's negative or positive, these feelings over time becomes the identity of a place. And to this group, it's no new news that the everyday built environment has an impact on the quality of our lives, right? Where you live and your zip code oftentimes determines your likelihood of living a long and healthy life. And this is particularly true in the US. Now, this is a map of New York. And if you look at the two neighborhoods within the red circle, you see East Harlem, which is a predominantly Black and Brown community and has one of the lowest life expectancies in the city. On the other hand, just south of East Harlem, you have Upper East Side, which is a wealthy white neighborhood, and it has the highest life expectancy in the city. And these two neighborhoods are just a few blocks away, right? So it's astounding to think that the life expectancy gap between these two neighborhoods is almost 10 years, right? And we have to recognize that this didn't happen by chance, but it is by design. And it's really deeply rooted in systemic racism, such as redlining and disinvestments of certain neighborhoods. So we know that our health can be adversely affected by the neighborhood characteristics, such as poor air and water quality, substandard housing, the lack of access to nutritious food, or even safe places for people to play and exercise. So place really matters, and the built environment has a fundamental role in shaping how healthy we are as individuals and as communities. So today I wanted to talk about this idea of designing places for human flourishing. So what does that mean? Well, in the context of the built environment, the way I define human flourishing is that, simply put, the ability for people to live a good life no matter where they live. So this is about creating the condition where no physical barriers prevent one from living a fulfilled life with dignity, happiness, and well-being within the wider community, and where social inclusion, coexistence, and sense of belonging exists. So in terms of physical attributes, as simple as this sounds, this means having a complete neighborhood where your everyday needs of people are met. So this means, again, access to parks and public spaces, clean air, healthy food options, access to transportation, safe streets, affordable housing, right? The list goes on. And it seems pretty straightforward, right? But it is shocking how many communities don't have access to these basic everyday needs. But human flourishing is really more than just the basic needs. It goes beyond that. And it's about designing with intention for a humanizing world. And this means designing for human connections, possibilities, wonder, joy, belonging. And it's about using the built environment as a tool to promote greater social value. So I like to use this example of the dinner party to explain this. And as designers and planners, we oftentimes focus on the hardware. So on the plates, the utensils, the table setting, right? And quite frankly, this table setting looks very beautiful, and I would love to have dinner there, right? But these things are important and matter, but what makes a dinner party sort of memorable and successful is really the conversations, the people, the aroma, the ambience. It's all these intangible things that makes a difference. And so we need to think about both the hardware and the software when we design places. And you can still have a great pizza party with paper plates, right? But we need to first understand the reason for why you are gathering. And what's the purpose of this dinner party? And then we can be really intentional about what experiences and emotions we want to create. And then decide whether we're having a pizza party or, a 5-course meal with fine china. But you need to have an intention of how you are designing things. So how do we intentionally design for human flourishing? Well, we need to start by focusing on the people and create an inclusive process with people at the center. So this means rather than starting with an idea of what a building and a design might look like, it is really important to ask the question, well, what are the human needs and experiences we want to create? And what are the feelings we want to surface in place? Now, in any critical problem solving or design process, we typically go through these 3 basic steps, right? So the first step is discovery or research, and this is really about understanding the opportunity and challenges of our problem. Then you have design, which is about the solution formulation for the identified challenge and opportunity. And then finally, you have implementation of the solution. So in a people-centered design process, people's needs are front and center to every step of this process. So this means that at the discovery or design research phase, we're really trying to understand the human conditions and needs and desires by engaging the users and the community stakeholders very early on in the process. And these can be done through surveys, ethnographic observations, interviews, shadowings. There's many different methods to do this. And then in terms of the design phase, it's about designing for human experiences and eye-level conditions rather than prioritizing the physical form or the aesthetics. So it's about being clear and intentional about how you are prioritizing for the human need. So, for example, if you were to design for comfort and joy, you will likely have a very different outcome than if you were to design for efficiency, right? And then finally, in the implementation phase, this is really about changing the way we see and measure value in our built environment, so that it's not just about the quantitative physical values or the economic values, but social values and metrics that matter to people and users. So to get a little bit more granular on what it means to have a people-centered orientation, I wanted to talk about these different human understanding or different dimensions of humans. And, to be honest, humans are complex creatures and sometimes, quite frankly, hard to understand. But by studying people through these 4 dimensions of what are they doing, what are they using, what are they thinking and feeling, we can make sense of humans more holistically and understand how and why people inhabit spaces in certain way. So doing is about activities and behaviors. Using is about products and the environment that they're engaged with. Thinking is about understanding perceptions and beliefs of people. And then feeling is really about the emotions, needs, and desires. And this framework is particularly useful in the initial research phase when we're trying to collect data around the human conditions to really understand the opportunities and challenges. So now what I wanted to do is share, rapid fire share of some work from my time at Gehl and how this idea of the human flourishing shows up in these 3 different projects and client types. So the first one is designing for safety and dignity. This is for a city government. Then we have designing for health and inclusion. This is work we did for a foundation. And then finally, designing for delight and joy is for a developer. All right. So this first project, Barrio 31, is a project with the City of Buenos Aires' Secretary of Social and Urban Integration and the World Bank and also Inter-American Development Bank. And Barrio 31 is one of the oldest informal settlements in Buenos Aires with over 40,000 residents, where not even the basic infrastructure of plumbing or electricity were available to all the residents. So the challenge here was, how might we integrate Barrio 31 as a formal neighborhood in Buenos Aires? And how might we create and improve the public realm to foster safe public life in one of the oldest informal settlements in Buenos Aires? So we started with research and engagement to understand really the social dynamics that exist in the barrio. And this led to the development of an overall public space strategy within the neighborhood, but also the creation of linkages and connections between the informal settlement and the existing formal city. So the goal here was really to make Barrio 31 into a real neighborhood within the city rather than a segregated slum that was perceived as dangerous and inaccessible. So here we have the integrated public space network plan with different kinds of open spaces. And so you see a system of linear parks, pocket parks, a sports field, shared streets, and really it's sort of a comprehensive look at what are the needs of the public realm. And here now we're seeing some images of before and after. On the image on the left, you see how it used to look like, where you can see some of the informal vendors sort of setting up shop on the street. And then on the right-hand side, you see an after shot where you see the roads have been paved, drainage and sewer systems put in place. You have a street light, street lights are placed, improvement in the facades, but also formal areas for the vendors. So by the simple act of placing these stalls, the vendors are no longer considered informal, but they're recognized as part of the city's commerce. Here's another image of another main street. And, one of the things that was interesting is that during the research phase, we found out that kids had to carry carry an extra pair of shoes to go to school because oftentimes the streets would flood and then they would have muddy shoes, right? So just by understanding this, the simple act of paving a street becomes huge for them, right? And again, while the intervention of paving streets and including drainage may sound small and very minimal, the fact that the kids could go to school without muddy shoes just gave them back dignity. And again, the simple act of placing light poles provides safer environments in the evenings for people to walk. And, these are things that we take for granted in the developed world, but these are really essential in the built environment. Here's an image of a playground that used to exist, pretty simple. And this is the intervention that was made by the city, where now you have new design with more creative and fun equipment for kids, but we also see plants, trees were planted, water fountains, and benches, and really making an invitation for people to come and play and stay. The next project, this one is about designing for health and inclusion. And this is a very different kind of project. This is a project that was funded by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And the burning question here was, how might public spaces support more equitable health outcomes? So out of that research and investigation, the Inclusive Healthy Places Framework, or the IHP, was developed. And the mission with this project was to really ensure that we create places where everyone has a fair and just opportunity to live a healthy life. And recognizing that this can only happen if the built environment was shaped and sustained with health and inclusion in mind from the beginning. And it's a data-driven, people-first approach to evaluating and creating healthy, inclusive places. So the framework functions both as a process as well as an outcome of health and inclusion. And the framework is really creates a shared language and an approach for a range of audiences that includes not only planners and designers, but policymakers, health practitioners, as well as health, community organizations that are working at the intersection of health equity and the physical environment. And it really offers a library of tools and resources for setting and measuring outcomes. Now, there is a lot packed in this wheel. And obviously it's too much information to get into details today, but you can download this report. Just type in Inclusive Healthy Places Framework, and it should pop up for you if anyone is interested in seeing the whole study. And so this framework is rooted in 4 guiding principles. And within each of these principles, you have drivers, which are thematic, policy, and practice areas, and under which you have indicators and metrics to track whether or not we are achieving these goals. So just quickly, I'm going to go through the 4 principles. The first one, context, is really about recognizing the histories and legacies of community context by really cultivating knowledge of the existing condition, assets, and the lived experience of the community. Process is about empowering residents and key stakeholders before you design a place, and ensuring that the people deeply rooted and invested in the community have a hand in shaping their neighborhood. Design and program is both about the physicality of space, but also programming and how the spaces are activated. And then finally, last but not least, sustain is a principle that is oftentimes overlooked in the design process of public spaces. And this is about recognizing that after a design is completed, a place is actually never finished, and making sure that it is set up for long-term success and that public spaces can become a platform for social resilience as well as capacity building in communities. And so currently this framework is put into action in partnership with 4 US organizations, some of them probably very familiar to you all, but American Planning Association is creating a guide and a toolkit for planners that will help them integrate principles and metrics for health equity in their practice. LISC is a national funder and nonprofit working with community-based partners to really improve health and safety through community-led open space planning. Then we have New Jersey Community Capital. They are a community development finance institution, and they're focused on community-wide development plan for the city of Paterson in New Jersey, so it's a specific city. And they're using the framework to reshape the way its own organization works and invests in community, but also elevating open spaces in their communities. And then finally, we have NRPA, and they're working with 2 park agencies and using this framework to better engage and reach the communities they serve. All right, so then we now have the final project. This is Rosemary Square, and it's Designing for Delight and Joy. And this is a project for related companies in West Palm Beach. And this project was formerly known as City Place. Some of you may have studied this project, but it was one of the first outdoor lifestyle centers in the US. And it was actually very successful when it opened in the year 2000. But since then, the city had changed and evolved, and City Place has sort of become dated and not as attractive, and really sort of started to lose its tenants and visitors. So the challenge for us was to, how do we reposition a poor-performing development asset for a prime real estate developer? And rather than jumping immediately into ideas of how to fix the problem with design solutions, we really took the time to understand what was working and what wasn't working in terms of both physical infrastructure, but also the human experiences and behaviors that were happening in place. So we conducted studies on how people were inhabiting the space through ethnographic observations, intercept surveys, interviews, shadowing people, and with this kind of human-oriented data, we had a better understanding of the life in City Place. And we really gained a human insights, which helped us develop the vision. So the vision was really to transform City Place from an outdoor mall into an urban district, a place that is inviting for not only shoppers, but the community at large, where families, kids, and the elderly could come here and enjoy simple moments of community and delight. So it really became from a shopping destination to an authentic, cherished place in the city where community could gather. This is an image of what it used to look like, very mall-like, controlled, and sort of dated atmosphere. And this is an image of what it looks like today. So a lot of attention was put into the public spaces to create comfortable and inviting places to linger. So there was an intentionality about extending a handout to the community and saying, you are welcome here. You don't necessarily have to just buy things here, but you can use the public spaces here. And one of the things that was really important to the success of this project was that the client created partnerships with the retail tenants to offer community-oriented programming. So here in the bottom, in the middle, you'll see an image of storytelling time happening on the lawn. And so this is a local bookstore offering community storytelling time. This is another example of how a florist or a plant shop is providing plant potting workshops for the community. So rather than investing only on the physical infrastructure, a lot of attention was put in to creating experiences and programming for the community. And Rosemary Square is a very attractive place today for not only locals and shoppers and tourists, but has also become a prime location for companies because it is thriving with life and people want to be where there is life. So this is an example, I will say, where the dinner party was really designed with intention for the social value we wanted to achieve rather than just the physical form. Okay, so I wanted to end by leaving with you all with this question and invite you to think about what kind of human flourishing do you want to invite in the places you design? Thank you.
Thank you, Maki. Thank you, Maki. Now we're going to open up for some questions. I have a question, Maki. You have worked globally. How do you tackle global difference in your projects?
So yes, global and cultural differences. This is the question that I really love. And it's something that culture is something that I deeply care about. And, I'm Japanese. I grew up in Spain and I've lived in many cities in the US. So I'm very acutely aware of the different cultural norms and, continue to be curious about the cultural differences and similarities that we experience. So, the way this shows up in my work is, there's different ways. But for one, I would say understanding the different cultural norms and the communication styles of people has actually been very helpful for me, especially when I work with clients from different parts of the world. And, I'm completely generalizing here, but I could say typically Americans tend to be much more direct and to the point and efficient in how they communicate, right? Versus Asians or Japanese. I'm Japanese. And, Japanese people in particular, what's not said is as important as what's said. So you kind of need to read between the lines. And so having that kind of cultural sensitivity makes me more aware of how I communicate with my clients and, the community. So that's been really helpful for one. And then in terms of, I would say, in terms of community engagement, it's really important to know and learn the cultural context and the histories of the communities with whom you're engaging, right? In some countries, there's a huge mistrust towards government. And, you can, in those kinds of contexts, you can't just show up and survey and interview people and on behalf of the city. You really have to gain their trust first and find ways to break the ice and sort of find different approaches and methods to engaging them. And then I will say lastly that, while people are different, cultures are, different, many aspects of human behavior is quite universal. Right? So humans need to feel safe and protected. We experience the world with our five senses. We yearn for a social connection. Kids love to play no matter what country and culture they're from, right? So it's important to remember these universal truths of humans and also remember a design for those things.
Okay. Thank you, Maki.
Thank you, Maki, for that as well. I also have a question. What are some of the opportunities or challenges of working with interdisciplinary teams and projects?
Yes, I work a lot with interdisciplinary teams, and I think if you're not already doing that, that is a must. It's the way it's going to be. It's the future. And especially if you're working in a field that is as complex as designing cities, you definitely need different experts at the table. And I love learning from others. And when you collaborate with people who have different expertise and ideas, I really believe that it makes the product much stronger. And, it allows me the opportunity to see things the way that I didn't see things, right? So it really opens our perspectives. And I think this is important. And again, a city is not a singular thing. It's so complex. And there's so many people who need to be involved, not just experts and consultants, but again, the community as the people who live and breathe, right, and experience the city. And well, in terms of challenges, is it easy? Not always. It's not always easy to work in an interdisciplinary or collaborative places, especially when, the different experts could sometimes be territorial or want to be the shining star at the table. So it can get complicated, but, I do think, finding or designing the process of collaborative work is as important too, right? Designing a process of how you work and can engage and the approaches is important. And I'm a very process-oriented person. I love process. I think about how to design even a workshop, right? And not just the outcome. And so I think those things are really important to know beforehand and prepare for it.
Thank you, Maki.
Thank you, Maki. One more question.
Sure.
When working with the private sector or developers who are often focused on the economic performance and physical design, how do you convince them about the importance of designing for human flourishing or emotions, which might sound too soft for some of them?
Yes, that's a very good question. Well, first of all, I think you have to speak your client and customer's language and know what matters to them, right? And I do think that in general, designers, and I do this too, so I to be blamed too, but designers and planners oftentimes use too much professional jargon, right? And we need to use simple, plain language that resonates with our audience. And human flourishing ultimately is about creating social value. And I think that forward-thinking developers and companies that understand that social value is tied to economic value, that they go hand in hand, right? And that dynamic places with strong sense of community helps actually increase their property value. And that places with great public life means more foot traffic, which means potentially more retail sales. And this helps the bottom line. So it's not, it's the same. You may use different languages, but it ultimately, helps developers. And I think there's a lot of interesting developers and forward-thinking developers today. And Lend-Lease came with a report on tackling loneliness, for example, and how to design for connectedness. Now, Lend-Lease is a global developer, and they're talking about loneliness. I don't think this would have happened 10 years ago. So I do think there has been a shift in the world. And I also think that developers are going to be required more and more to design for social value and have positive societal outcomes and impact. And in the UK, I know, for example, that they have this thing called the Social Value Act, where basically as part of the government's procurement process, they take into account of social value in the award of the procurement. So as developers, you need to deliver social value as terms of their contract, right? And as cities and governments require this more, developers are certainly going to have to think about this a lot more. But I do think that the world is changing, and we're starting to see more companies, not just in our fields, but private companies in general, engaging in corporate social responsibility and being socially ethical. There's a long ways to go, but any future-ready company is thinking about the ESGs and the CSRs, and you see all these kinds of acronyms of environmental social governance, and a lot of the companies that want to be successful in the future are already thinking about these things.
Thank you, Maki.
Maki, I also have just one more question. Given your international experience, what would be your advice when working with underserved communities, and how do we grant voice and empowerment to community participants to ensure that they are a part of the planning and design process?
Yes, well, I think we need to begin with go to where the people are and don't ask them to come to you, right? And you need to go to them early. And then 2, you need to gain their trust. And to gain their trust, sometimes you need to partner with local organizations and find local champions who are working with those underserved communities. Because sometimes it's hard for us as consultants to fly in and show up, right? You really have to work with the champions. And then, I think this is something obvious, but listening to the community and learning what matters to them is really critical, right? Honoring their voices and not doing this just as a checklist, right? But really hearing them and defining with the community what outcomes and values we want to create. And this is not about, getting a laundry list from the community about their wish list of what they want, but it's really more about gaining insights into the values that they care about. And lastly, I will say, don't engage with them and then disappear, right? Go back to them, tell them and share back to them what you've heard from them, and then make sure people's voices are reflected in the design and invite them back to provide feedback. You know, I think, especially in underserved communities, oftentimes they have gone through so many planning processes and they've gone through planning fatigue, right? And they never see any action and change. So respect their time, honor their time, and make sure people's voices are, again, reflected in the project. And when you are engaging with the community, you really are the facilitator and they are the experts on their needs, right? Don't go in like you know everything, because you don't. There's so much you can learn from the community.
Okay.
Thank you, Maki.
And we have one more question from the audience. It's for one of our faculty members. She's asking, what urban design principle do you think has required the most advocacy when you work in interdisciplinary teams or when you work on teams with less background in urban design?
I think finding the common ground, and for me, that is the people, is critical, right? The challenge when you work in interdisciplinary teams is that, you know, you might have the architect, the landscape, you know, the engineer, the urban design, and the planner, and they all have their expertise and focus on what they're good at, and that's important. But ultimately, the things that we design are for the people and the, you know, and the user. So understanding then end users and understanding and coming to consensus that what kind of value are we creating for the people that we're designing for? Then you have a common alignment in the result, rather than, you know, talking about the different technicalities or aesthetics of things, because design oftentimes is an opinion. And so I think, yes, putting people at the center helps in an interdisciplinary approach.
Okay. I think we're getting up to the time limit. So I'm just going to thank you, Maki, for joining us tonight. It was a pleasure, a very informative lecture here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Edwin.
Thank you, Maki.
Great to be here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.